General Thrax had seen bioweapons refuse direct orders from their own creators. He had seen apex predators turn on entire command structures the moment restraints loosened by a single inch. He had never seen one salute. If you love stories where the galaxy's most feared weapon breaks every rule anyone ever wrote about it, subscribe now, because what happens in the next 10 minutes will make you question everything you think you know about control. Explain this to me, Thrax said, voice low with barely restrained fury, like I am not looking at a live feed of a Class 10 Apex asset standing at parade rest in front of a human commander. The officer beside him swallowed hard. General, the asset has maintained that posture for 6 hours. It hasn't moved except to follow direct, verbal commands from Commander Reyes. 6 hours, Thrax repeated, 6 hours, and it hasn't torn her apart. On the holoscreen between them, the image was unmistakable. 9 feet of dense obsidian-scaled muscle, claws long enough to shear through starship plating, standing perfectly still beside a human woman in a field commander's uniform. The creature's molten eyes were fixed forward. Its posture was rigid discipline, controlled. Everything the intelligence reports said was impossible. That creature, Thrax said, was designed by the Korrathi military as an uncontrollable terror weapon, bred specifically to resist command structure, so it couldn't be turned against its creators. It has killed 11 handlers across 3 different containment facilities. And you're telling me a single human commander walked in, gave it an order, and it obeyed? Yes, sir. Thrax's claws dug into the edge of the console, leaving faint grooves in the reinforced metal. That is not possible. That designation was engineered specifically to prevent exactly this outcome. General, the officer said carefully, there's something else you need to see. He pulled up a second feed, audio only, time-stamped 3 days earlier. Static crackled, then a voice, low and mechanical, translated through equipment clearly never designed to process complex vocalization. Command structure, unclear, the creature's translated voice rasped. No orders, no purpose, only hunt. Then a second voice. Human, calm, steady in a way that made Thrax's skin crawl. You don't need a hunt, Commander Reyes had said. You need a mission. Follow me, and I'll give you one. Silence. Then, impossibly, understood. Commander. Thrax stared at the frozen frame on the screen, the massive creature's molten eyes locked on the small human figure standing fearlessly in front of it. Rewind that, he said quietly. Play it again. The officer complied, and Thrax listened a second time, then a third, searching for the trick, the manipulation, the hidden control mechanism that would explain why a bioweapon designed to answer to no one had just accepted command from an unarmed human. He found nothing. General, the officer said, voice tight with something between fear and awe. Command wants to know if this represents a security threat or a strategic opportunity. They need your assessment within the hour. Thrax looked back at the holoscreen, at the creature standing in perfect discipline beside a woman who, by every metric of galactic power, should have been dead within seconds of approaching it. Get me a direct line to that outpost, he said. I want to see this with my own eyes before I decide whether we've discovered a weapon worth using or something far more dangerous than anyone in this fleet has understood. Because if a creature engineered specifically to reject command had just accepted one, willingly, completely, without coercion, then something about the nature of control itself had just been rewritten. And General Thrax intended to find out exactly what that meant, even if the answer terrified him more than the weapon itself. The transport arrived at the outpost 11 hours later, and General Thrax stepped off the ramp with 4 armed escorts and a temper he was struggling to keep contained. Where is Commander Reyes? He demanded. Training grounds, sir, the outpost's liaison said, visibly nervous under Thrax's glare. With the asset. Take me there. Now. The walk across the outpost felt longer than it should have, every step accompanied by whispered rumors from personnel who clearly hadn't expected a Korrathi general to arrive unannounced. When they reached the training grounds, Thrax stopped dead at the site, waiting for him. The creature, designation KV-9, though the personnel here had apparently started calling it something else entirely, was running a defensive drill. Not attacking, not rampaging, moving through a precise sequence of tactical positioning exercises, responding to Commander Reyes's verbal commands with the kind of discipline Thrax had only ever seen in elite military units trained for decades. "Hold position," Reyes called out. The creature froze instantly, 9 feet of lethal muscle stopping mid-stride without a single wasted movement. "Advance, left flank." It moved. Thrax watched, jaw tight, as the exercise continued for another full minute before Reyes finally noticed him standing at the edge of the training ground and called a halt. "General," she said, approaching with a calm that bordered on insolence given the circumstances, "I wasn't informed of an inspection." "You weren't informed," Thrax said, "because I don't trust anyone in this chain of command to report accurately what's happening here. Explain this. Now." Reyes glanced back at the creature, who had settled into a watchful stance behind her, molten eyes tracking Thrax with an intensity that made his escort visibly tighten their grips on their weapons. 3 months ago, this facility received KV-9 as a decommissioned asset, Reyes said. Classification, unsalvageable. Scheduled for termination after killing its 11th handler. I was assigned to oversee the process. And instead you weaponized it for your own command. I didn't weaponize anything, Reyes said, an edge entering her voice for the first time. I asked it a question nobody else had bothered to ask in 4 years of failed handling attempts. What question? What it wanted. Thrax felt something shift in his chest, not quite disbelief, but something adjacent to it. You're telling me a Class 10 bioweapon designed explicitly to resist command structure simply told you what it wanted. Not in words. Not at first. Reyes's expression softened slightly, and for a moment Thrax saw something in her that he recognized from decades of his own command experience, the particular patience required to understand something that couldn't yet explain itself. It didn't want freedom, General. It wanted purpose. Every handler before me tried to control it through force, through restraint, through fear. I tried something different. I gave it structure instead of a cage. Behind her, KV-9 shifted its weight, and the low resonant sound it made sent a chill through every human soldier present. It's not obeying because it's been broken, Reyes said quietly. It's obeying because for the first time in its existence, it has a reason to. Thrax stared at the creature, at the disciplined stance, at the molten eyes that showed none of the chaotic aggression documented in 11 separate handler death reports. That is either the most remarkable rehabilitation I have ever witnessed, he said slowly, or the most sophisticated deception this fleet has ever encountered. And, Commander, I intend to find out which before I leave this outpost. Because command protocol dictated only one response to an uncontrolled class, 10 asset suddenly demonstrating obedience, total verification or total termination. And somewhere behind Reyes's calm exterior, Thrax could see she already knew exactly which outcome she was fighting to prevent. You have 1 hour, Thrax said, to prove this isn't deception. After that, I invoke direct, override authority, and this asset returns to Korrathi custody for full behavioral analysis. Standard protocol for that analysis involves total neural deconstruction. Reyes's composure cracked just slightly. That's a death sentence. That's standard protocol, Thrax corrected coldly. One that exists precisely because unverified command compliance in a bioweapon of this classification represents an unacceptable strategic risk. If I'm wrong about what's happening here, General Command will want to know exactly how it did it, even if that means taking it apart to find out. Behind Reyes, KV-9 let out a low sound, somewhere between a growl and something more complex. The outpost's translator, still active from the earlier drill, crackled weakly. Threat to Commander, the mechanical voice relayed, distorted but unmistakable. Every soldier present tensed. Thrax's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. Stand down, Reyes said immediately, turning to face the creature directly. KV-9, he's not a threat to me. He's evaluating the mission. Do you understand? A pause. Long enough that Thrax found himself holding his breath despite every instinct telling him not to show weakness in front of a bioweapon capable of tearing through his escort in seconds. Understood, the translator finally relayed. Standing down, the creature's posture shifted back to disciplined stillness, but its molten eyes remained locked on Thrax with an unnerving, calculated focus. "You see that?" Thrax said, voice tight. "It assessed me as a threat within seconds and prepared to act. That's not obedience, Commander. That's a weapon protecting its handler. It's called loyalty," General Reyes said, "something your fleet's engineering teams apparently never considered when they designed a creature meant only to fear and kill." Thrax's jaw tightened. Loyalty doesn't emerge from 4 years of documented aggression and 11 deaths. No, Reyes agreed. Trauma emerges from that. And trauma, left unaddressed, looks exactly like the uncontrollable weapon your reports describe. She stepped closer to KV-9, close enough that Thrax's escort raised their weapons in alarm. A motion Reyes ignored completely. But trauma isn't the same as the creature's true nature, General. It's just what got layered on top of it by people who never bothered to ask what was underneath. She reached out and rested a hand against the creature's massive foreleg. KV-9 didn't flinch, didn't tense, didn't show a single trace of the aggression that had defined its entire documented existence. "Show him," Reyes said quietly. The creature's head lowered, molten eyes meeting Thrax's directly, and for the first time since he'd arrived at the outpost, the general felt something crack in his rigid military certainty. "I was made to destroy," the translator relayed, halting and imperfect, but undeniably deliberate. "No one asked if I wanted to." She asked. The training ground went silent except for the distant hum of outpost machinery. "And what did you tell her?" Thrax asked, his voice quieter than he intended. "That I did not know," the creature said. "She said that was allowed. First time anyone said that was allowed." Thrax stood frozen, decades of military doctrine colliding with something his training had never prepared him to process, the possibility that the galaxy's most feared bioweapon program hadn't created an uncontrollable monster at all. It had created something that had simply never been asked what it wanted to become. And in 11 minutes, Thrax was going to have to decide whether that discovery was worth protecting or whether protocol demanded he destroy it anyway. 11 minutes felt like 11 years. Thrax paced the edge of the training ground, his escort watching him with the particular wariness reserved for a superior officer, wrestling with a decision that could end careers or lives, depending on which way it broke. "General Command is waiting for your assessment," his aide said, quietly, tablet raised. "They want the override authorization confirmed or declined within the time frame you specified." "I'm aware of the time frame," Thrax snapped. He looked back at KV-9, who had returned to its disciplined stance beside Reyes, molten eyes tracking his movement with a calm attentiveness that no report in his possession had prepared him to witness. Everything about the creature's behavior contradicted 4 years of documented evidence. Everything about Reyes's explanation defied standard doctrine on bioweapon rehabilitation. And yet here it stood, silent, controlled, waiting. "Tell me something," Thrax said, turning to Reyes. "If I authorize the override, if I send this creature back for neural deconstruction, what happens to you?" Reyes didn't hesitate. "Court-martial, most likely. Unauthorized command bonding with a decommissioned military asset is a serious violation. I knew that risk when I started this." "Then why take it?" "Because 11 people died believing this creature was incapable of anything but violence," Reyes said. "And every single one of those deaths happened because they treated it like an object instead of something that could still choose. I wasn't willing to be the 12th person who never asked." Thrax's aide cleared his throat. "General, the window is closing. Command needs your decision." "I know what Command needs," Thrax said, not moving his eyes from the creature. "What I don't know is what's actually standing in front of me." He stepped closer, closer than protocol allowed, closer than his escort was comfortable with, close enough that KV-9's massive head tracked his approach with deliberate precision. "You," Thrax said, addressing the creature directly for the first time. "The translator. Does it still work both ways?" "Yes," the mechanical voice crackled back, halting but clear. Then answer me honestly. If I give the order to stand down permanently forever, if I take away every mission, every structure Commander Reyes gave you, what happens? The creature was silent for a long moment, long enough that Thrax wondered if the question had been too abstract, too far beyond whatever cognitive framework the Korrathi engineers had originally built into it. Then I go back to what I was. No purpose, no command, only hunt. Because hunt is the only thing left when nothing else is given. The training ground went utterly still. That's not a threat, Reyes said, quietly watching Thrax's face. That's an honest answer to an honest question. He's telling you what happens to any weapon abandoned by the people responsible for it. Thrax felt the weight of 4 years of failed containment reports settle differently in his chest now. Not as evidence of an uncontrollable monster, but as a documented record of exactly what Reyes had just described. 11 deaths. For years of escalating violence. Not because the creature was inherently unsalvageable, because nobody in 4 years had given it anything to be instead. General, his aide pressed, voice tight, the override window. Tell command, Thrax said slowly, that I need 48 more hours before I submit a final assessment. Sir, that's outside the authorized. I am aware of what it's outside of, Lieutenant. Thrax's voice carried the full weight of his rank now. I did not fly across 3 systems to make a decision this significant based on a fear response I haven't fully verified. 48 hours. That's an order. His aide hesitated, then nodded and retreated to relay the message. Thrax turned back to Reyes, who was watching him with an expression caught somewhere between cautious hope and disbelief. 48 hours, he said, to prove to me that what I'm looking at isn't a ticking failure state waiting to happen the moment your command structure disappears. Because, Commander, if you're wrong about this, if this creature turns on you on this outpost, on anyone, the blood is on both our hands. Mine for allowing the delay. Yours for creating the conditions that made it possible. I understand the risk, Reyes said. I don't think you do. Thrax said quietly, glancing once more at KV-9's molten, watchful eyes. Because if I'm wrong about what I just heard, if this creature really does have nothing left but the hunt the moment structure disappears, then in 48 hours, we're not just deciding its fate. We're deciding how many people it takes down with it when we get the answer wrong. 48 hours. Thrax spent every single one of them watching. He observed KV-9 through drills, through rest cycles, through Reyes's quiet one-on-one training sessions that looked less like commanding a weapon and more like something closer to mentorship. He reviewed every biometric reading, every vocal pattern, every micro-expression the creature's alien physiology allowed. He found nothing that supported his fear, and everything that supported Reyes's claim. General, Reyes said, finding him alone at the edge of the training ground on the final evening, your window closes in 2 hours. I know. You've made your decision. It wasn't a question. Thrax looked at her, then past her, to where KV-9 stood watching the sunset over the outpost perimeter wall, an act of stillness that had nothing to do with obedience and everything to do with something Thrax had spent 48 hours refusing to name. Do you know why the Korrathi military designed KV-9 to resist command structure? He asked. To prevent it from being turned against its creators. Partly, Thrax said, but also because command structure requires trust, and trust requires vulnerability. My engineers believed a weapon incapable of trusting anyone would be safer than one that could. He shook his head slowly. They were wrong. A creature incapable of trust doesn't become safer. It becomes exactly what your reports describe, violent, unpredictable, and eventually uncontrollable. Not because it's a monster, because it's alone. Reyes said nothing, letting him continue. I've spent 48 hours trying to find the flaw in what you've done here, Thrax admitted. The manipulation, the trick, the hidden control mechanism that would let me file a report my superiors would accept without question. He looked at her directly. I didn't find one. What I found instead was a bioweapon that stopped being a weapon the moment someone treated it like it had a choice. So, what's your assessment? Reyes asked, and for the first time, Thrax heard the fear underneath her steady composure. Thrax turned toward KV-9, who had noticed the conversation, and was watching them both with quiet, patient attention. KV-9, Thrax said, "Come here." The creature approached, massive and lethal and utterly disciplined, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm going to ask you the same question I asked before," Thrax said, "but this time I want the full truth, not the abbreviated version the translator gave me. What do you want? Not a mission, not an order. What do you actually want for yourself?" The creature was silent for a long moment, molten eyes flicking briefly to Reyes before returning to Thrax. "To stay," it finally said, the translator crackling with something that sounded impossibly like emotion. "Not because commanded, because chosen. First time anything was chosen." Thrax closed his eyes briefly, feeling the last of his resistance give way. "Lieutenant," he called to his aide, who had been waiting anxiously nearby, "transmit this to General Command. Effective immediately, Asset KV-9's decommission and termination order is rescinded. Reclassification to voluntary command-bonded status, under continued supervision of Commander Reyes. Full report to follow, detailing findings on rehabilitation through structured trust rather than forced compliance." His aide stared at him. "General, that reclassification doesn't exist in current doctrine." "Then we're creating it," Thrax said, "because in 4 years, this program has learned exactly one lesson worth teaching the entire fleet. You don't build loyalty through fear. You build it by giving something a reason to stay." Reyes exhaled, the tension of 2 days finally breaking across her face. "Thank you, General." "Don't thank me," Thrax said, watching KV-9 settle beside her with quiet, unmistakable relief. "Thank whatever instinct made you ask a question nobody else in this fleet bothered to ask in 11 failed attempts before you." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back one final time at the creature that had, 48 hours ago, been scheduled for total neural deconstruction, and was now standing calm and disciplined in the fading light, not because it had been broken, because for the first time in its existence, something had finally given it a reason not to be. Command structure, Thrax murmured to himself, was never the thing keeping it in line. Trust was. We just never bothered to offer any until now. Behind him, KV-9 lowered its massive head toward Reyes, and the low, resonant sound it made, warm, steady, unmistakably content, echoed across the training ground like the answer to a question the entire galaxy had been asking for 4 years without ever thinking to ask it directly.